I want to tell you something I've never said out loud to anyone except my buddy Ray, and even then only after 2 beers and a long silence. It's about how a single voicemail, 63 seconds, no greeting, no apology, ended 22 years of a life I had spent every paycheck building. Before we get into it, drop a comment and let me know which city or state you're listening from. I read every single one. It started on a Thursday in late October, the kind of morning where the sky can't decide if it wants to be grey or just give up entirely. I was out back on the patio in Decatur, Georgia, drinking my first cup and watching the neighbor's dog dig up the same patch of lawn he'd been working on all week. My phone was face up on the table. I wasn't expecting anything. The voicemail came in at 7:14 a.m. I know the exact time because I look at it the way you look at a clock when you wake up from a bad dream, just trying to get your bearings. It was my stepdaughter's voice, Jasmine. 26 years old, I'd known her since she was 4. She didn't say hello, she said, "I need you to understand that this is about what's best for everyone. The wedding is a family event, my real family. I've talked to Mum and we both agree you shouldn't be there. I think it's better for everyone if you just don't come. Please don't make this into something." That was it. 63 seconds, then the beep. I sat there with the phone in my hand, and the neighbor's dog kept digging, and the coffee went cold, and somewhere down the street a school bus hissed to a stop. I read the time again. 7:14. Like the number meant something I hadn't figured out yet. I didn't call back. I set the phone on the table face down, the way you cover something you're not ready to look at. Then I went inside and poured the coffee down the drain. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was doing the math. 22 years. 4 years old when I first met her, sitting in her mother's kitchen in a yellow shirt with a cartoon duck on the front, eating cereal and watching me like I was a problem she hadn't solved yet. 26 now. Graduate degree from Georgia Tech. Engagement ring on her finger that I'd helped her mother pick out the setting for. Wedding venue deposit that came out of my account 6 months ago. $3,500. I remember the number because my wife, Renee, had said you don't have to do this. And I had said she's our daughter. And Renee had kissed my cheek. Our daughter. I went to work that morning. I'm a retired operations manager, but I still consult part-time for a logistics firm out of Atlanta. I sat in front of my laptop and moved numbers around on a spreadsheet for 3 hours without really seeing them. My assistant knocked on my office door once to ask about a vendor call. I told her to push it. She looked at me sideways, but didn't ask. By noon, I'd replayed the voicemail 4 times, not looking for loopholes, just listening to the tone of it. The flatness, like she'd rehearsed it, like she'd said it out loud in the mirror before she pressed record. I thought about the year Jasmine was 12, and her father, a man named Douglas who had been absent since before she could spell the word, showed up for 3 weeks over Christmas, and then disappeared again. She'd cried at my kitchen table. Real ugly crying, the kind where you can't catch your breath. I'd pulled my chair next to hers and just stayed. Didn't say it would be okay. Just stayed. She'd leaned into my shoulder that night without asking. I replayed the voicemail again. My real family. At 2 p.m., Renee called. I let it ring through. She called again. I let that one go too. She didn't leave a message which told me everything she didn't need to say. My buddy Ray called at 4. He'd heard through his wife, who heard through someone else. Word travels in the way it always does among people who've known each other long enough. He didn't ask if I was okay. He said, "Where are you?" I said, "Still at the office." He said, "Go home. I'll come by at 6. I drove home slow. I took Candler Road instead of the highway, the long way, past the barber shop I'd been going to for 15 years, past the elementary school where I'd coached Jasmine's soccer team 2 springs in a row, past the church where my mother-in-law had her funeral, and I'd been the one to carry the flowers because Renee's hands were shaking too hard. The house was quiet when I got home. Renee's car was in the driveway, but the front room light was off. I stood in the kitchen for a while without turning anything on. She came downstairs eventually. She was wearing the blue cardigan I'd bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. She looked at me the way people look when they've already had the argument in their head and decided how it ends. "I didn't know she was going to call you like that," she said. "But you knew I wasn't coming." She looked away. Jasmine felt strongly about it. She said she didn't want any tension on her day, with Douglas going to be there. "Douglas," I said. "Just the name, nothing else." Renee pressed her lips together. I know how that sounds." "Do you?" She started talking about Jasmine's feelings, about the complexity of the situation, about how Douglas had really been making an effort lately, about how a wedding day has to be what the bride needs it to be. I stood at the kitchen counter and listened. I didn't interrupt. My dad raised me not to interrupt, even when every word lands like something being taken off a shelf and put somewhere you can't reach it. When she was done, I asked her one question. "Did you tell her that's not okay?" She didn't answer right away. That pause was an answer. "She's my daughter," Renee finally said. "She's been my daughter for 22 years, I replied. I went to bed before Ray arrived. I heard the two of them talking downstairs for a while, low voices, then the door closing. Ray texted me at 9. "Call me tomorrow. We'll figure it out." I didn't sleep much. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling fan going around and around and thought about the word family, how many times I'd heard it, how many times I'd said it back, how many times it had meant something different depending on who was in the room. I'd been paying the mortgage on this house for 18 years. My name was on it. My credit score had built it. My overtime had fixed the roof in 2019, replaced the HVAC in 2021, paid off the car Jasmine drove to college because the old one's transmission had gone soft, and I hadn't wanted her on I-85 in something I didn't trust. I wasn't keeping score. I want to be clear about that. You don't keep score with your kids, you just don't. But when someone hands you back the receipt and tells you you're not invited, you start to notice things. The next morning, I got up at 5:30, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window while the sky went from black to grey to the kind of pale nothing it had been the day before. Renee came down around 7. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "Are you going to the office?" she asked. "Not today," I said. I drove to the bank first. SunTrust. Same branch I'd been going to since before Renee, before Jasmine, before all of it. The branch manager, a woman I'd dealt with for years, pulled up my accounts without fuss. I asked to review everything. Checking, savings, the joint account, the automatic payments. "When you deposit $3,500. My account. Catering deposit $1,200. My account. Dress alterations picked up on my card last spring. $340. I sat in the parking lot afterward with the printouts on my lap. The paper was warm from the printer. I looked at the numbers until they stopped feeling like accusations and started feeling like accusations. That afternoon, I called my attorney. I'd used her before for a business matter, years back. "Her name is Patricia Dean." She answered on the second ring, which is one of the reasons I've stayed with her. I explained the situation, brief, no drama. "The house," she said. "Tell me about the title." "Solely in my name," I told her. Renee and I had never formally changed it when we married. "We talked about it," I'd offered. She'd said someday. Someday had never arrived. "You have options," Patricia said. I told her I knew. I just needed to understand what they were. I didn't make any decisions that day. I drove home, made dinner, chicken, rice, the green beans Renee likes, and set the table for 2. We ate mostly in silence. She asked about the bank. I said I'd been reviewing some things. She nodded like she wasn't sure whether to ask more. She didn't. Ray came by Saturday afternoon. We sat on the back patio, same chairs Renee and I had bought at a yard sale in 2015 for $20 each. He brought coffee, the good kind, from the place downtown. "Walk me through it," he said. So I did. All of it. The voicemail, the conversation with Renee, the bank, Patricia. Ray didn't interrupt. He's good that way. He just listened, and when I was done, he turned his cup in his hands and looked out at the yard for a while. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked. "I'm going to stop paying for a wedding I'm not allowed to attend," I said. Ray nodded slowly. "And the rest of it?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at the yard, the garden Renee had planted in the far corner, the fence I'd repaired 3 summers ago, the oak tree that had been there when I moved in and would probably be there long after both of us. "I don't know yet," I told him, "but I'm done pretending." The wedding was 2 weeks out. I called the venue on Monday morning, politely, explained there had been a change in the financial arrangement for the event. The woman on the phone was professional, unhurried. She looked up the reservation. "The deposit was made under your name," she confirmed. "That's right," I said. "I'll need to cancel that payment." She processed it without comment, the way people do when they've heard every version of this kind of story, and stopped being surprised. I called the caterer next. Same conversation, different voice. Then I sent Patricia an email with 3 words. "Let's move forward." Renee found out on a Wednesday. Jasmine had called her, and then she called me, and I could hear in her voice the specific kind of panic that comes when something you assumed was solid turns out not to be. "You can't do this," she said. "I already did," I told her. My voice came out calm, which surprised even me. "The deposits were mine. I cancelled them. The venue, the caterer, Marcus is going to." She stopped. Marcus was Jasmine's fiancé. Good enough man. I had nothing against him. "I'm sorry Marcus is caught in this," I said, "but I'm not attending the wedding, and I'm not paying for one I've been uninvited from. She's your daughter." "You made sure to remind me that she isn't," I said quietly. "Right before you agreed with her." The line went still. I heard her breathing. "I didn't mean." "I know what you meant, Renee. So does she." I hung up. I sat in the living room for a long time with the phone in my lap. Outside, the neighbor's dog was at it again. Same patch of lawn, same determination. I watched him for a while. There's something almost admirable about that kind of focus. Douglas called me that evening. I didn't even know he had my number. He'd gotten it from somewhere. Jasmine, probably, or one of her friends who didn't think it through. His voice was the kind of friendly that means the opposite of friendly. "Hey man, I hear there's been a misunderstanding. I just want you to know nobody meant any disrespect. She's stressed. You know how brides get." I let him finish. "Douglas," I said, "how much child support did you pay between 2002 and 2015? Silence. "Because I've got the receipts on my end. The school fees, the medical co-pays, the soccer camp, the ACT prep course. 3 years of Georgia Tech tuition partially because the Hope Scholarship didn't cover everything. I kept records. My accountant is very thorough." More silence. "You were her real dad at the venue deposit," I said. "Be her real dad now." I ended the call. Renee didn't come home that night. She stayed with her sister across town. I found out from a text she sent at 10 p.m. 3 lines, no punctuation, something about needing space to think. I read it once and set the phone down. I slept better that night than I had in a week. The following Monday I met with Patricia again, this time in person. Her office on Peachtree has a window that looks out over a parking deck, and, if you lean slightly, a strip of sky. I'd been in this office twice before. Both times about business. This time was different. She laid the papers on the table the way doctors lay out test results. Organized, direct, giving you time to look before she talked. "You can list the house," she said. "Solely your name. You have standing." "What about Renee?" She's a resident. That's different from an owner. She has rights regarding process and timing, but not to the property itself. I sat with that for a moment. I'm not trying to punish anyone, I said. Patricia looked at me over her glasses. I know, but sometimes the right decision looks like punishment from the outside. I called a realtor that afternoon. Her name was Donna. She'd sold 2 houses on my street in the past 3 years and had a sign up 2 doors down that said, "Sate Eat 18 red letters, so big you could read them from the car." She met me at the house Thursday morning, walked every room with a notepad, tapped walls, tested light switches, opened and closed windows. "Your wife knows we're doing this?" she asked carefully. "She'll know soon," I said. Donna looked at me for just a second longer than necessary. "Okay, I can have cons to you by end of week." The house listed on a Friday. I had already arranged a 2-bedroom apartment in Avondale Estates, 12 minutes away. Not fancy. Clean. Good light in the kitchen. A table big enough for 2, though mostly it was just going to be me. Renee came home that Saturday to find a lockbox on the door and a 4-hour sale sign in the front yard. I know, because I got a call from her at 1:17 p.m. I was at Ray's house eating his wife's cooking and trying to feel normal, and the sound she made when I picked up wasn't quite a word yet. "The house is for sale," she said finally. "Yes," I said. "You listed our house." "My house," I said gently. "I offered to put your name on it. You said someday." She said my name once, just my name. "I would have done anything for this family," I told her. "For 22 years I showed up. I paid the bills, I coached the soccer, I sat with your daughter at the kitchen table when her own father couldn't be bothered, and the one thing I asked for, to stand at her side on the best day of her life, you both decided that wasn't something I'd earned." She started to say something. I kept going. "I don't need a seat at the table if you're going to keep reminding me I'm just a guest." The line went quiet for a long time. "What am I supposed to do?" she finally said. Her voice had changed, gone soft in a way I hadn't heard in a while. "That's not something I can answer for you anymore," I said. "I've been answering that question for 22 years. I put the phone down. The offer came in 11 days later. A couple, both teachers, relocating from Savannah. Pre-approved, moving timeline that worked. They asked for a small credit on the HVAC inspection. I said yes without hesitating. Signing day was a Tuesday at the title company's office off Memorial Drive. Fluorescent lights, folding table, a woman notarizing documents with the weary efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. My hand was steady the whole way through. I hadn't expected that, but there it was. I got a text from Jasmine while I was driving home from the signing. It was the first she'd contacted me directly since the voicemail. "Dad, I need to talk to you. Please." She hadn't called me Dad in the text. She'd written it. That hit differently. I sat in a parking lot outside a Kroger for 10 minutes before I wrote back. "When you're ready to have a real conversation, I'll be here." I wasn't done with her. I want to be clear about that. You don't just stop loving a child you've raised because she made a terrible choice. But I was done accepting the version of myself she'd handed back to me. The wedding happened. I wasn't there. I heard it was beautiful. Ray's wife mentioned it without meaning to and then looked like she wished she hadn't. I told her it was okay. I meant it. Renee filed the paperwork 2 months later. Not quite divorce, what they call a legal separation in Georgia, which is its own specific kind of quiet. We divided things without a courtroom fight, which is the only grace I can say the whole thing had. She moved into a place near her sister, took the furniture she'd brought into the marriage, left the rest. I was already in the apartment by then, smaller, simpler. The kitchen window looked out over a parking lot and, if you lean slightly, a strip of oak trees at the edge of the property. I took my coffee standing up most mornings, watching the light change. I went back to the VFW one Thursday in January. Ray was there, same booth he always picks, back to the wall, facing the door. Old habit from his army days. He looked at me for a long time and then said, "You look like you've been sleeping." "I have been," I said. "Good." We sat there for a while without talking, which is one of the things I appreciate most about a friendship that's lasted 30 years. You don't always have to fill the silence. Jasmine called on a Sunday in February. I answered on the third ring. She didn't do the thing I was afraid she'd do, which was pretend. She just said, "I don't know where to start." "Start wherever feels true," I said. She told me she hadn't known about the catering deposit, the venue deposit, all of it, that her mother had handled the finances, and she'd assumed it was coming from somewhere general, not specifically from me. She told me that Douglas had lasted exactly 2 weeks past the wedding, before going quiet again, which surprised no one. "I'm sorry," she said. Not one of those quick cover-your-bases apologies, the kind that sits in the air for a second before you say the next thing, because there isn't a next thing right away. I didn't tell her it was okay. It wasn't, not entirely, and she knew it. I raised you, I said. I'm not asking you to forget Douglas. I never asked for that. I just needed you to know that what I gave wasn't temporary. It wasn't because I had to. I wanted to. She didn't say anything for a moment. "I know that now," she said. "I think I knew it then too. Mom was so sure, and Douglas was right there, and I convinced myself it was simpler." "It looked simpler," I said. "Simple and right aren't the same thing." We met for lunch 3 weeks later, a place in Decatur we'd been to before, years ago, when she was home from her sophomore year. Same booths, same sweet tea, same ceiling fan, with one blade that turned slightly off from the rest. She looked like herself. A little older than I remembered, a little more awake. We talked for 2 hours. Not about the wedding, not about her mother, not about Douglas or the house or any of it. We talked about her job, about a project she was proud of, about a trip she was thinking of taking. I told her about the apartment, the oak trees I could see from the window, the diner around the corner that made biscuits, the way my grandmother used to make them. When we hugged goodbye in the parking lot, it was the kind of hug that means something is being rebuilt, not that it's already done. That's where we are. Ongoing, careful, real. I drive past the old house sometimes, not on purpose. It's just on the way to certain places I go. The new owners planted something in the front bed that I can't quite identify from the car. The mailbox has a different flag. The yard looks like someone is paying attention to it. It still looks like a good house. It just isn't mine anymore. And some mornings, standing in my kitchen window with my coffee watching the oak trees hold still in the cold, I think that's exactly as it should be. 22 years taught me something I couldn't have learned any faster. You can give someone everything, and they can still hand you back the guest list and leave your name off it. That's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their fear, and you don't have to live inside someone else's fear. Your dignity doesn't need their permission to stay intact. Sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is pack quietly, sign the papers, and walk out into his own life. That too, I have come to understand, is a form of love, the kind you practice on yourself when you finally run out of reasons not to. I used to think that doing the right thing was its own protection, that if you showed up long enough, paid enough, stayed steady through enough bad seasons, the people you loved would eventually see it clearly. I believed that the way you believe something you've never actually tested, quietly, without question, because testing it would mean something had gone wrong. Something went wrong. What I understand now, sitting at this little table in Avondale with the oak trees outside the window and a cup of coffee that's still hot, is that life has a way of making the bill come due, not as punishment, not as some outside force deciding who deserves what, just as consequence. 63 seconds on a voicemail. That's all it took to make 22 years of choices visible. Jasmine's choice, Renee's silence, Douglas showing back up with his easy grin like he'd earned something he'd never once paid for. Every one of those choices carried a weight, and eventually weight lands. Mine did too. I made choices for 22 years. Every tuition payment, every Saturday at the soccer field. Every night I stayed at the kitchen table until the homework made sense. Those weren't sacrifices I resented, but they were real. And when the voicemail came, I had to decide what kind of man I was going to be on the other side of it. That decision required something I hadn't fully practiced before, the willingness to look at the truth plainly without softening it for anyone's comfort, including my own. That's the thing nobody tells you about clear thinking. It isn't comfortable. It would have been easier to call Jasmine back and say, I understood. To show up at the wedding anyway, off to the side, making myself small the way I'd been making myself small in photographs for years without noticing. Easier to keep paying for a seat at a table I'd already been asked to leave. Intelligence isn't just knowing things. It's being honest about what you're looking at, even when what you're looking at hurts. And then there's the matter of what you do with that honesty. Knowing the truth and acting on it are two separate things. I've known men who could see exactly what was happening to them and still couldn't move. Fear does that. Habit does that. The long practice of putting everyone else's comfort ahead of your own dignity does that. What I found, somewhere between the bank and Patricia's office and the phone call with Douglas, was that I still had the capacity to act. Quietly, without drama, without needing anyone's permission or approval. That steadiness, the ability to keep moving forward when everything in you wants to either collapse or explode. That isn't something you find. It's something you build, one hard day at a time, until it's just part of how you're made. Jasmine and I are still finding our way back to each other. It isn't simple and it isn't fast, but it's honest, which is more than I could say for most of the last few years. Renee and I are cordial in the way that people are when they've stopped pretending and found out that the truth, even a hard one, is lighter than the lie. I think about the dog down the street sometimes, the one that kept digging at the same patch of lawn all week. I used to find that a little absurd. Now I think I understand him. Sometimes you just have to keep at the same ground until you find out what's worth keeping. The chair at the head of my little table in this apartment doesn't slide in the same way the old one did. But I sit in it every morning. And I don't make myself smaller to do it.